names, coaching tips to fit your aims. No more playing simple games. Unlock the power deep inside.
Join Marsha and John as they report on the transformative keynotes and workshops led by master coaches Steph, Hans, and Carl at the House of Coaching. In these podcasts, they uncover stories, strategies, and successes that turn good professionals into great ones. This is where coaching meets reality. Welcome to the House of Coaching podcast.
Bring out the best, it's true.
Today, we're going to explore something a little bit unexpected.
Oh.
Yeah, the strategic use of silence.
Silence.
Yeah, in communication.
Okay.
To help us with this, we're going to be diving into some fascinating material from Hans DeMeyer,
Okay.
who is a real expert in value communication. And he actually kicks off his presentation on silence with silence.
He does. It's a brilliant way to immediately grab your attention and make you think about how you react to silence.
Right.
I bet most people instinctively check their volume,
Yeah.
thinking there's something wrong with their audio.
It's almost like that primal urge to fill the void.
Exactly.
Like in a sales pitch or negotiation,
Yeah.
that awkward silence hits.
Yeah.
And you feel this like urge to say anything to
Fair.
break the tension.
And DeMeyer explains that this aversion to silence
Yeah.
is deeply rooted in our psychology.
Really?
Yeah, he describes it as a fight or flight response triggered by our primitive brain. You see, back in our cave-dwelling days,
Yeah.
silence could signal danger,
Oh,
a predator lurking nearby. So we're hardwired to feel uneasy when things go quiet.
So that fight or flight response explains the fidgeting, the nervous laughter,
Yes.
the sudden urge to just blurt out something.
Anything.
But how does this fear of silence play out in a more modern setting, like a business meeting?
Well, think about it. In a business context,
Yeah.
silence can be perceived as a sign of weakness
Oh.
or incompetence.
Interesting.
We fear being judged or rejected if we don't constantly assert ourselves verbally.
So it's like we equate talking with competence and control.
Precisely.
Right.
But here's the fascinating paradox.
Okay.
DeMeyer highlights research from Harvard Business School suggesting that silence can actually lead to more thoughtful and insightful responses.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, one study found that when people were given a full 8 seconds of silence,
8 seconds?
yes, after being asked a question, they provided more comprehensive and well-considered answers.
That seems like an eternity.
It does, doesn't it?
In a typical conversation, I can't even imagine how long that would feel in a video call.
It would probably feel even longer,
Yeah.
wouldn't it? But that's exactly DeMeyer's point. Silence, even though it feels uncomfortable,
Right.
creates a space for deeper thinking.
Okay.
It allows people to process information more thoroughly
I see.
and formulate more nuanced responses.
So it's almost like we're so busy talking
Yeah.
that we don't give ourselves or others
Sure.
enough time to really think.
Absolutely. And that's where DeMeyer introduces the concept of what he calls strategic silences.
Strategic silences.
Yes.
Okay.
He suggests that there are specific types of silence
Okay.
that we can deliberately incorporate into our communication
Right.
to enhance its impact.
Okay.
It's about using silence as a tool,
I see.
not seeing it as an enemy.
Okay. I'm definitely on board with that idea.
Sort of.
Silence as a strategic tool, it's almost counterintuitive. Yeah. But it makes sense.
It does.
Tell me more about these strategic silences.
Well, the first type DeMeyer describes is
Yeah.
the let it land silence.
The let it land silence.
Imagine you've just presented a key piece of information,
Okay.
let's say a compelling ROI figure.
Okay.
Instead of rushing on to the next point, you deliberately pause,
Right.
allowing that information to sink in for your audience.
So you're giving the listener time to digest
Exactly.
what they've just heard,
Yes.
not just bombarding them with information,
Right.
but letting it resonate.
Exactly. DeMeyer uses a great analogy to illustrate this.
Okay.
He compares it to a train pulling into a station
Okay.
to let passengers on board.
All right.
The information you've just shared is the train.
Okay.
And those passengers represent the full implications of your message.
Interesting.
You need to give them time to board.
I love that analogy.
It is good, isn't it?
It really paints a clear picture of how important it is to allow those moments of silence for information to truly sink in.
Yes.
What about the other types of strategic silences? What else can we add to our communication toolbox?
Well, the second type DeMeyer outlines is called the dig deeper silence.
The dig deeper silence.
And this one is particularly powerful when you're dealing with client concerns or objections.
Oh, okay.
Instead of immediately jumping into solution mode,
Right.
you use silence to encourage the other person to elaborate.
So instead of interrupting or trying to control the conversation,
Yes.
you're creating space for them to fully express their thoughts and feelings.
Precisely.
Okay.
And DeMeyer emphasizes that this can lead to some incredibly valuable insights.
Really?
Yes, by listening actively
Yeah.
and allowing those silences to linger.
Okay.
You might uncover hidden needs or challenges that you wouldn't have discovered otherwise.
It's like resisting that urge to fix things immediately,
Right.
and instead choosing to truly understand the situation first.
Exactly.
I can already see how that shift in approach could be beneficial. So what's the third type of strategic silence?
The third type DeMeyer highlights is the breakthrough silence.
Breakthrough silence.
And this one is especially effective during tougher conversations like price negotiations or when you're facing strong objections.
Right.
Imagine a client telling you your product is too expensive
Okay.
instead of getting defensive or immediately launching into a justification.
Yeah.
You pause.
Okay.
You let that silence hang in the air.
That sounds a little nerve-wracking, to be honest.
It can be.
But I can see how it might create a sort of conversational vacuum that the other person feels compelled to fill.
You got it. That's exactly the point.
Right.
By strategically using silence in these situations,
Yeah.
you can prompt the other person to think more deeply
Oh, okay.
and even come up with their own justifications or solutions.
So it's almost like you're using silence as a subtle nudge,
Yes.
a way to guide the conversation without forcing it in a particular direction.
Exactly.
Very clever.
Thank you.
I'm starting to see how these silences can be real game changers in communication.
They can be.
But let's be real.
Okay.
Putting this into practice probably takes some effort. It's not like we can just flip a switch and become masters of silence overnight.
You're absolutely right. It takes practice and conscious effort to incorporate these strategic silences effectively. But DeMeyer reassures us that it's a skill anyone can develop. He even compares it to debugging code.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you start by identifying those moments where you instinctively rush to fill the silence, those bugs in your communication, and then you work on replacing them with more strategic pauses.
I like that analogy. It makes it
Uh-huh.
feel less intimidating. Like there's a process we can break down in practice.
Exactly.
So where do we even begin? Are there any specific techniques DeMeyer recommends for getting comfortable with those silences?
Absolutely. He suggests a simple but powerful technique called the 5-second rule.
The 5-second rule.
After you've made a key point or asked a question, try counting to 5 slowly in your head, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, and so on.
Okay.
This gives you a concrete way to get used to those moments of silence and resist the urge to jump back in prematurely.
5 seconds. Honestly, that sounds like an eternity when I imagine it in a conversation. Wouldn't that make the other person uncomfortable?
It might feel that way at first, especially if you're used to rapid-fire conversations, but remember, we're conditioned to associate silence with discomfort. The 5-second rule helps you retrain your brain and break that automatic response. And as for the other person, they might initially feel a bit surprised by the pause.
Right.
But DeMeyer argues that this can actually work to your advantage. It can signal that you're genuinely considering their perspective and not just waiting for your turn to speak.
Interesting. So it's not just about getting comfortable with the silence ourselves, but also recognizing that it can have a positive impact on the other person, making them feel heard and respected.
Exactly. And while you're practicing those strategic pauses, it's crucial to pay attention to your body language. You don't want to look like you've frozen or that you're uncomfortable.
Yeah, you don't want to replace the verbal awkwardness with a whole new set of nonverbal awkwardness.
Right.
What are some key body language tips to keep in mind?
DeMeyer stresses the importance of maintaining eye contact. Not staring intensely, but a gentle, engaged gaze. A subtle smile can also work wonders, as can leaning forward slightly to show you're actively listening.
Okay.
And of course, avoid those telltale signs of nervousness, like fidgeting or constantly looking away. He even shares an anecdote about an IT professional who felt instantly more respected by clients once he stopped fiddling with his pen during those strategic silences.
It's amazing how such subtle cues can influence how people perceive us. And what about online meetings? I imagine those silences can feel even more amplified and awkward in a video call. Any tips for navigating those virtual silences?
Absolutely. DeMeyer acknowledges that virtual silences can be tricky. He recommends being even more deliberate with your nonverbal cues.
Okay.
Nodding, smiling, and using those visual affirmations to show you're engaged. You can also announce your thinking time, saying something like, "Let me just consider that for a moment."
To avoid any awkwardness or assumptions that there's a technical glitch.
Those are great practical tips.
Okay.
You're giving the other person a heads up that you're intentionally taking a moment to process, not just zoning out or experiencing a technical difficulty.
Exactly.
So we've talked about the benefits and types of strategic silences and even some techniques for implementation, but I'm guessing there are also some potential pitfalls to avoid. What are some common mistakes people make when trying to incorporate silence into their communication?
Hey there, awesome listener. Want to know something exciting? Right now, you've got an incredible opportunity waiting for you. We're giving away 20, yes, 20, free copies of the amazing book, Facilitation is a Game. Head over to podcast.thehouseofcoaching.com right now to claim yours. Remember, once they're gone, they're gone.
You're right. There are definitely some common bugs to be aware of, as DeMeyer calls them. One he highlights is the marathon silence. It's tempting to think that if a little silence is good, then more must be better.
Right.
But overdoing it can backfire, making people uncomfortable or even creeped out. He gives the example of a salesperson who would just stare intently at clients after every sentence, and it ended up being more off-putting than effective.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that would be a bit much.
It was.
So how much silence is too much?
Is there a sweet spot?
DeMeyer suggests thinking of silence like espresso,
Espresso.
short and potent. Aim for those 5 to 8 seconds, maybe 10 at the most, before it starts to feel awkward. And remember, it's not about being silent for the sake of being silent. It's about strategically using those pauses to enhance your message.
Okay, short and sweet, got it. What are some other bugs to watch out for?
Yeah.
What else can trip us up when we're trying to master the art of strategic silence?
Another common mistake DeMeyer points out is what he calls panic body language. It's that scenario where you manage to keep your mouth shut, but your body betrays you. The fidgeting, the darting eyes, the nervous sweating, all those telltale signs of discomfort can completely undermine your attempt at a strategic silence.
It's like our body language sends a mixed message.
Right.
We're trying to project confidence and thoughtfulness, but our nonverbal cues are screaming, "I'm freaking out."
Exactly. And DeMeyer's advice for overcoming this bug is to practice. Stand in front of a mirror, record yourself, pay attention to your default panic moves, and consciously work on replacing them with more composed and confident gestures. He mentions a CEO who used to fidget constantly during meetings, but he found that simply placing his hands flat on the table during those moments of silence helped him feel more grounded and in control.
That's a great tip. It's like giving yourself a physical anchor to help stay present and avoid those nervous habits. What other bugs do we need to debug in our quest for communication mastery?
DeMeyer also warns against what he called the timing trap.
The timing trap.
This is about using silence at the wrong moment, which can completely derail the conversation. Imagine greeting someone with a cheerful, "hello," and then just staring at them silently. Not exactly the best way to make a good first impression.
Ouch. Yeah, I can see how that would be awkward. So when should we use these strategic silences? What are some good cues to look for?
DeMeyer recommends deploying them after key moments. After you've presented a price proposal, after you've asked a thought-provoking question, or after you've shared a particularly important piece of information, those are all prime opportunities to pause and let the silence work its magic.
So it's about being strategic and intentional with those pauses, not just randomly sprinkling them into the conversation like awkward confetti.
Precisely. And finally, DeMeyer highlights a mistake he calls the compensation explosion.
The compensation explosion.
It's that tendency to overcompensate after a period of silence by talking rapidly and excessively. It's like we feel this need to make up for the quiet time by cramming in as many words as possible.
It's almost like we see silence as a deficit, something that needs to be filled rather than a tool in its own right.
Exactly. And DeMeyer encourages us to shift our mindset. See those pauses not as awkward gaps, but as valuable elements of the moments of power that allow us to connect more deeply and create a more impactful message.
I love that reframing. It's not about filling the silence, but embracing it. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most powerful communication happens in the absence of words.
Absolutely. And speaking of powerful examples, DeMeyer shares a story about a client of his named Mark, an IT solution architect who used to struggle with this very issue. He was a classic fill the silence kind of guy, always feeling the need to dominate the conversation. But after learning about the strategic use of silence, he decided to give it a try.
Okay, I'm always a sucker for a good transformation story. What happened with Mark? Did those strategic silences make a difference?
That IT solution architect who learned to embrace silence and ended up closing his biggest deal ever.
Wow.
Mark said, For the first time in my career, I didn't feel responsible for filling every second.
Wow.
And it was in those moments of quiet that I truly heard what the client needed.
That quote really captures the essence of what we've been discussing, doesn't it? It's not about avoiding silence altogether, but rather shifting our mindset and seeing those pauses as opportunities for deeper connection and understanding.
It's so easy to get caught up in our own agendas and talking points that we forget to truly listen.
And not just listen to the words being spoken,
Right.
but also to what's being communicated non-verbally
Yeah.
in those subtle pauses and shifts in energy.
So for our listeners who are ready to start experimenting with strategic silence,
Okay.
what's one key takeaway they can put into practice right away?
Well, remember that 5-second rule we talked about?
Yes.
Challenge yourself to pause for those 5 seconds after making a key point
Yeah.
or asking a question.
Right.
It might feel awkward at first,
Yeah, it will.
but with practice, you'll start to see those silences,
Right.
not as gaps to be filled,
Yeah.
but as bridges to deeper connection.
And don't forget about those nonverbal cues.
Oh, right.
Keep those panic moves in check.
Yeah.
Project confidence and engagement even when you're not speaking.
Yes, those nonverbal cues are crucial. A genuine smile,
Yeah.
steady eye contact, and a relaxed posture can make all the difference. And remember, silence isn't a one-size-fits-all solution.
No.
It's about being intentional and strategic.
Yeah.
DeMeyer emphasizes that it's about choosing the right type of silence for the right moment.
Exactly. Think back to those 3 types of strategic silences.
Yeah.
Let it land.
Uh-huh.
Dig deeper.
Yeah.
And break through.
Right.
Each serves a distinct purpose.
So as we conclude our deep dive,
Okay.
I'd like to leave our listeners with a little challenge.
Okay.
Choose one type of strategic silence.
Right.
Let it land, dig deeper, or break through,
Okay.
and intentionally incorporate it into your next conversation, whether it's a client meeting, a team discussion, or even a personal interaction.
Okay.
Pay attention to how the other person responds.
Yeah.
Do they seem more engaged, more thoughtful?
Yeah.
Do you feel a deeper connection?
It's a simple experiment, but it can be incredibly revealing.
Right.
And you might be surprised by how much richer and more meaningful your conversations become
Right.
when you embrace the power of the pause.
Well said. It's a reminder that sometimes the most powerful communication happens in the absence of words.
If you are looking for more insights on communication and the power of silence, visit www.thehouseofcoaching.com.
Okay.
We have lots of resources to help you become a more confident and impactful communicator.
You've been listening to the House of Coaching podcast, where real transformation happens one conversation at a time. If today's insights sparked your interest, hit that like button and subscribe. You would not want to miss what's coming up next as Marsha and John take you behind the scenes of more transformative sessions with our master coaches. Visit thehouseofcoaching.com, connect with us on LinkedIn, and join a community of forward-thinking professionals who are reshaping the future of business.
Wake up with fire in your veins. John and Marsha spark the flames. Coaching tips to fit your aims. No more playing simple games. Unlock the power deep inside. Let the house of coaching be your guide. Run the race with giant strides. No more reasons left to hide. Bring out the best